Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I'm going to wait so that people can join this before I get started. I want to thank people who have been supporting my channel over the years. Much respect to you. I truly appreciate your support, and I hope that people continue to support this channel. I may do a separate video as to why I haven't been posting lately instead of discussing it in this video, but I'm glad to be back, and I look forward to this discussion about Juneteenth. As many people know, Juneteenth has become a federal holiday. This week, the Congress voted to make it a federal holiday. And so what I'm going to do is talk about Juneteenth. Also, I'm going to deal with this issue of symbolism versus substance, because there are very important bills before Congress that have not been passed. And overnight, basically, they went ahead and passed this bill making Juneteenth a federal holiday. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how they are eager to give us symbols over substance. So I'm just going to wait for a couple of minutes for people to join. And while I wait, I want to encourage people to follow me on Twitter at NewPosBlog. Again, follow me on Twitter at NewPosBlog. Also, I want to encourage you, if you are into art, I want to encourage you to attend my art exhibit that I will be having at the Mansion at the Great Blacks in Wax Museum here in Baltimore. I will post a link to the invite this on Facebook so that people can attend that event. We're going to make sure that precautions are in place so that people are safe and protected from COVID. At this point, a lot of people have vaccines, so there's less of a fear and things are opening up. So I hope that you all can join that exhibit. It will deal with a very important issue of police brutality. I will use my art to speak out, just like I use this channel to speak out against injustice in the society, racism in the society, etc. Shout out to Def Rocker. Thanks for tuning in. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. Shout out to LaDonna. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate everybody that's tuning in and people that will watch it on the playback. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Juneteenth. I'm going to go through this website that talks about the history of Juneteenth. And then I'm going to talk about all these laws that Congress passed over and just went straight ahead to pass a law making Juneteenth a federal holiday. And let me be perfectly clear before we even get into this. I fully support Juneteenth. It is something that should be celebrated, something that should be recognized. And it's just unfortunate that many of us went through elementary school, went through middle school, went through high school, etc., without even hearing about Juneteenth. So it is good that there is a discussion about Juneteenth. It's good that it is receiving more recognition than it has in the past. So I'm going to go into the history right now. I'm going to share my screen with you all so that you all can see the sources that I'm looking at. So hopefully you're able to see this. So we're just going to go through the history real briefly. And this is from the History Channel, their website. So let's go to the beginning of this. And basically, Juneteenth marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to take control over the state to ensure that enslaved people would be freed. And it came, the troops' arrival came like 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And Juneteenth honors the end of slavery in the United States. And it's considered the longest running African-American holiday. And as I mentioned before, on June 17th, it became an official federal holiday. Now, as this points out, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, and it had established that all enslaved people in Confederate states in rebellion against the Union shall be thenceforth and forever free. And that's in the Confederate states in rebellion against the Union. So that doesn't include all people being emancipated from slavery. And this article goes on to talk about how in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation did not instantly free any enslaved people. It only applied to places under Confederate control, not to slaveholding border states or rebellions areas already under Union control. And this talks about how as the troops advanced into the Confederate South, many enslaved people fled behind Union lines. So this goes on to go into more of the history. It talks about how in Texas, slavery had continued as the state experienced no large-scale fighting or significant presence of Union troops. So they were continuing to enslave Black people in Texas after this Emancipation Proclamation. So, you know, when the troops came there and, you know, took control and, you know, signaled freedom to the enslaved people in Texas, that became a holiday. And slavery was formally abolished when the 13th Amendment was passed, when it became a part of the Constitution abolishing slavery. So that's a basic rundown of Juneteenth and what it's all about. And, you know, it's very important that we celebrate Juneteenth, you know, and recognize it, you know. So my issue is not with, you know, I don't have any problem with Juneteenth. I fully support Juneteenth. You know, I do have mixed feelings about it being a federal holiday, you know, because as somebody pointed out in this viral post that has gone, you know, that they put up, I think it was on Twitter originally, and people took screenshots of it and shared it everywhere. And basically in that particular tweet, this person basically said something doesn't sit right with him, you know, seeing white people get a day off and get paid not to work on Juneteenth. Something doesn't sit right about that, you know, because here you had African people enslaved and we're marking a time of emancipation, and you got the same people that enslaved Black people getting a day off from work and getting paid to get off on a day honoring our emancipation or our freedom from bondage. So I get that. I mean, to a degree, I understand it, but I think that through holidays, you know, people are able to gain knowledge of different things that they may not have known about or had any interest in finding out about. And also it raises national consciousness. So again, I don't have any objection to Juneteenth being a federal holiday. My objection, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a second. My objection is to these people giving us symbolism over substance, you know, expecting us to be pacified back to sleep because they give us some holiday recognizing the emancipation of Black people. They expect us to go to sleep and think that everything is okay, to be pacified, to be content. Just like a baby, when a baby is crying, people put a pacifier in the baby's mouth or a bottle of milk in the baby's mouth to quiet the baby. That's how they're treating Black people. Here we have all these very important civil rights bills and legislation before Congress, and they have failed to act on these bills. They haven't done a damn thing about these bills. They're sitting around collecting dust while our people are still being denied voting rights. Our vote is being suppressed, while these police continue to kill Black people, racially profile Black people, and brutalize Black people. You have a bill before Congress now, and they keep passing it over. These Republicans have been obstructing progress. And then you have HR 40 that's been before Congress for like 30 something years. First, John Conyers presented it. Now you have Sheila Jackson Lee presenting it. But they passed over all of that stuff, skipped over all that stuff. And despite all these efforts to get real laws passed that will benefit African Americans, they have done everything that they can to obstruct these things. And it's not, it's primarily these Republicans, but you have these so-called moderates like that guy, Joe Manchin, standing in the way of our civil rights, standing in the way of equality for Black people and justice for Black people and freedom for Black people. But they give us these little tokens to rock us back to sleep, to deceive us, to bamboozle us, in the words of Malcolm X. So what I'm going to do is go through some of these laws that have been proposed, just to let you know about them. And we need to press and put pressure on our elected officials to make sure that they do everything in their power to pass these laws. The problem is you have a lot of these Republicans that are standing in the way. And I think that a lot of the criticism, a lot of people have been criticizing Joe Biden, and I'm all for criticizing somebody when they do wrong. But when we look at the lack of progress on these bills that I've mentioned, it's the Republicans standing in the way. And I'm going to go through this. I'm going to take you to some information on Wikipedia about this stuff, just to let you know what these bills are about and let you know who's standing in the way of the progress. So let me share my screen again, and hopefully people are able to see. If you have any issues, please let me know. When I get a chance, I will look at your comments. But I do plan to get back on my channel and, start posting regularly again. I've just been dealing with some personal matters. So here's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And as many people know, the Voting Rights Act, the original Voting Rights Act, was gutted by the Supreme Court, by Republican justices on the Supreme Court. Republican appointed justices. And we have to understand this, because you got these people out here pretending like the Democrats and the Republicans are one and the same when they're not. When it's the Republicans standing in the way of progress, when it's the Republicans trying to suppress your vote, when it's the Republicans opposing police reform, when it's the Republicans opposing reparations, when it's the Republicans opposing affirmative action, all these things designed to expand rights and, equality for Black people. It's the Republicans standing in the way of that. It's the Republicans trying to get rid of critical race studies and things of that nature. Basically trying to suppress real discussions about the problem of racism in the society, about the history of racism in the society. It's the Republicans doing this. So you had the Republicans gut the Voting Rights Act. And the Republican appointed justices gut the Voting Rights Act in the case of Shelby County versus Holder. And basically, they got rid of Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And that basically was a formula set up by, Congress to call for pre-clearance of various voting law changes in jurisdictions that had a history of discriminating against Black voters. So before they could pass any kind of laws affecting voting rights, they had to get pre-clearance from federal courts and from the Justice Department, if I'm not mistaken, before they could implement any kind of changes to voting laws. And this was necessary because it prevented these jurisdictions that had a history of discriminating against African Americans from discriminating against them today. That's what it did. It made it easier to stop efforts to suppress Black voting rights and Black voters, period. But the Supreme Court gutted that. So now you have people who have put forth the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to counter that decision of the Supreme Court, to address some of the points raised by that decision of the Supreme Court. And basically, the Supreme Court said that was an outdated formula, etc., and they used that to gut our voting rights. Now, the Voting Rights Act is still in place. Other provisions of it are in place, but a major part of it was that pre-clearance provision, and that's been taken out. So you have people who have put forth the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to address that situation. And it's very important because immediately after the decision in Shelby County versus Holder, you had these jurisdictions with a long history of discriminating against Black people rush to pass laws to suppress Black voters. Places like North Carolina passing laws designed to surgically target Black voters, by getting rid of, reducing early voting, by, imposing voter ID requirements, by putting all kinds of obstacles in the way of Black voters to make it more difficult for Black people to vote. And a federal court ruled that, that laws targeted Black voters. But those are the types of laws that were being passed around the country. And we see it today. After this election that took place, after the presidential election, after Trump lost, you had these right-wing racist Republicans all around the country rushing to pass laws to make it more difficult for Black people to vote. So you had these restrictions after the Shelby decision. And so now you have this proposal that's being presented that has various provisions. As pointed out here, it would broaden the scope of the courts. It would allow the U.S. Attorney General to send in federal observers to jurisdictions where it's necessary. It goes on to talk about federal pre-clearance requirements. Like, for instance, these requirements would be in place for any state that has had 15 or more voting rights violations within the last 25 years. Any state that has had 10 or more voting rights violations, and at least one of those violations were committed by the state itself within the last 25 years. Also, a state that had, any subdivision of a state that has had 3 or more voting rights violations within the last 25 years would also be subject to the pre-clearance requirement. And so this goes on further to, to talk about some of the other requirements. Instead of going through it all, I would just post a link in the description box to this video so that you all can read this material for yourself. But you have this measurement, this law that's being proposed, that's being obstructed. So I'm going to go through the issues with it. Yeah, so it talks about how the bill is expected to face a major hurdle of getting through a Republican filibuster in the Senate. And it goes on to talk about how it will require 60 votes to break the filibuster and proceed to an actual vote on the bill, meaning that at least 10 Republican senators would need to support the legislation. So now you have people talking about completely getting rid of the filibuster to make it possible for this to pass. So this goes through the history, and it talks about how the bill was introduced, back in February of 2019. And it talked about how it passed the House of Representatives. All Democrats voted in favor of the legislation, and all but one Republican voted against it. I mean, that's something that people need to take into consideration when they talk about what's not being done and who is opposing our rights in this country. Then it talks about how the bill was introduced again in July 2020. And then it talks about how the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, did not bring the bill up for a vote. Okay, so that's just a brief rundown um, of the status of that bill. Now I'm going to go to the George Floyd bill. This is another bill that was passed over and it hasn't been enacted. But yet we're giving these symbols. We're giving Juneteenth. But here's another bill that was passed over. And that's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021. You know, it talks about how this bill was drafted by Democrats, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus. You know, and you hear people constantly say the Congressional Black Caucus doesn't do this, they don't do that, and all that kind of stuff. But here's an example of them trying to put forth some legislation to address, you know, the problems of police brutality, the problem of police misconduct, the problem of racial bias in policing. And this runs down some of the provisions of this proposed legislation. It would grant power to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division to issue subpoenas to police departments as a part of, you know, a pattern and practice investigation. Also, it would grant states' attorney generals, you know, the power to create independent process to investigate misconduct or excessive use of force. It would establish a federal registry of police misconduct complaints and disciplinary actions. And that's very important because you have these police officers that are accused of misconduct, able to get jobs in other police departments, able to continue to abuse people and still being given job opportunities and still being allowed to remain in their positions. So that's very important. Also, it would include enhanced accountability for officers who commit misconduct by restricting the application of qualified immunity doctrine for local and state police officers. It will require body-worn cameras. It will require federal, you know, and that's for federal agents, federal police officers. It will require marked federal police vehicles to be equipped with dash cameras. Also, it would bar or restrict certain types of military equipment for police. It would require agencies to receive federal funding to adapt anti-discrimination policies and training programs, those targeted at fighting racial profiling. It would bar federal police officers from using chokeholds and other holds similar to the hold that Eric Garner was killed as a result of. Also, it would prohibit no-knock warrants, you know, similar to what happened in the Breonna Taylor case. And there are other requirements here. So I will, again, post a link to this in the description box so that people can check it out. You know, the other thing that I mentioned, another law that was passed over, you know, another substantive law passed over to give us symbols to appease us is HR 40. As I mentioned before, this was a you know, is an act that was originally presented by John Conyers. It was introduced in 1989, and here we are all these years later, and we still don't have the passage of this act. And it has, you know, the current iteration of this law has been presented by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. And I know all these ADOS people got so much to say about it and all that kind of stuff. To hell with all that kind of stuff. This is a step forward. This is something that, you know, deserves our support. So let me just, so this bill would call for, you know, a study of the question of slavery. It would call for a formal report with, and that report would include findings and recommendations on remedies and reparation proposals for African Americans. As a result of slavery, as a result of, de jure and de facto discrimination against freed Black people, et cetera. So this goes into more detail, it's designed to address the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. But yeah, that's just an overview of some of these substantive laws that have been passed over. And I'm going to just show you a quick image that really inspired me to do this video. It's an image that I saw on Facebook. And let me share my screen. And I'm sure many of you have probably seen this image as well. But this is the image where you had this white kid, stepping over all these important things to give you a holiday, to give you Juneteenth. And again, I don't have any problem with Juneteenth. I support Juneteenth. I have no objections to it being a federal holiday. But why are they giving us substance? I mean, they give us substance. I mean, why are they giving us symbolism over substance? They're not giving us, HR 40. They're not giving us the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill. They're not giving us the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They're not addressing this problem of all these jurisdictions trying to shut down and eliminate critical race study in schools, but instead they give us a holiday. Instead, they give us symbolism and tokenism and stuff like that. And they expect us to be appeased and satisfied with that. To hell with that. We should use this holiday to push even harder for these very important things that are designed to address that legacy of slavery. These different things in different ways are designed to address the current day discrimination that our people face, and to address, this legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. So those are my quick thoughts about this issue. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to check out your comments. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I truly appreciate it. So let me just go through your comments real quick to see if there is... Yeah, and that's true, Covina, man. Like, substance has significant opposition. It's like these people, these Republicans, they're okay with giving you some symbols of stuff. Like, they're okay as long as it doesn't threaten the status quo. Because, like, what's going to happen now is Juneteenth is going to be commercialized. It's going to be commercialized. These corporations are going to get in on it, and they're going to use it just like they pimped the Martin Luther King holiday and just how they're doing with Kwanzaa and stuff like that. They're going to dilute it. They're going to water it down and stuff like that. And they're going to use these holidays to sell us products and things that we don't need. They're going to use these holidays in order to enrich their companies. And it's just a shame, man. It's just a shame that they're able to get away with this kind of stuff. And we have to be the ones to speak out against this stuff, man, to condemn it. So Hasib said that people with PhDs in history have never heard of Juneteenth. Yeah, and it's just messed up, man. There's so many of us haven't, just don't know enough about Juneteenth. And many of us don't even celebrate it on our own. Like, we wait for the white man to give us a holiday before we recognize it, unfortunately. And that's just sad, man. It's just sad that we don't know this history. And, myself included, like, I found out about this, well after, going to high school and college and all that kind of stuff. And that's a damn shame, man. We should all know about this history. And that's a testimony as to why we still need, a Black History Month. That's a testimony as to why we still need critical race studies in our schools. It's just an example of how we're being miseducated in the school system. So shout out to DOD. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I mean, it's time for reparations, man. And it's like the only way that happens is if we push hard enough for it. We have to push these politicians. We need to be pushing Joe Biden. That man would not be president if it wasn't for black people. He's in debt to the black man, and we need to collect that debt. We need to demand that he support reparations and demand that all these other politicians that got into office on our backs through our vote, we need to make sure that they support reparations as well. Yeah, so Def Rocker asked if I think that some of these bills could be passed with the advent of the Juneteenth bill. And that's a good question. Like, perhaps, I think that what we should do is leverage Juneteenth to address these issues. And a lot of people are doing that by speaking out, just like I'm doing right now. That's one way to leverage it. And, speaking out is not enough. We need to reach our members of Congress, and push them to pass these laws. And, in many places, like many of these members of Congress actually support this legislation. But you have many that don't. You have these Republicans that don't. And the fact that you have these people in power that are opposing what we need and what we want just proves, again, just how important it is to vote the right people in office. We need to vote these people out that are obstructing these very important civil rights laws that are before Congress. And, unfortunately, many of these people, they are, voted in districts that are predominantly white, predominantly Republican, predominantly racist. So it is an uphill struggle to combat these people, these right-wing fanatics. And the fact that they're going all out of their way to stand in the way of a voting rights bill, a voting rights act, just shows you again how important it is to vote. These people would not be standing in the way of voting rights laws. They would not be suppressing your vote if our vote had no value, if our vote meant nothing, if our vote had no impact on the process. They wouldn't care who we voted. They wouldn't care if we had these laws in place to give us all these rights to vote. They wouldn't be going out of their way to suppress our vote if our vote did not matter. And it's time for us to realize just how important our vote is. And many, if not most, black people understand this. But you have these misguided, quote unquote woke people, these hotep buffoons on here telling you that your vote doesn't matter. That's a whole nother story. Yeah, so let me just continue going through your comments. Yeah, so I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. And also, later on, I'm going to do a video response to Candace Owens. She put up a tweet about Juneteenth. And that's going to be on my I Declare War channel. I'm probably going to do that in a few minutes. So head over to my I Declare War channel. And if you have not already done so, subscribe to that channel, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell for both of the channels. So with that, peace and blessings. Have a great day and happy Juneteenth and happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the house. Peace and blessings.